Frank's Red Hot is the perfect blend of flavor and heat, so you can use an entire bottle to make recipes like buffalo chicken dip or buffalo nachos, or even things that don't start with buffalo. Frank's Red Hot, I put that on everything.
Black Lives Matter, Craig.
Yep. This is a special and different episode of Podcast versus Everyone. Jeff will get into that in a second. I'm Craig Powers. With me is Jeff Nusser, as always. And then this week we have a special guest, Zane Murfitt, our colleague from Coug Center. Our data nerd is what you'd probably know him as, the master of the Tableau graph.
The guy who makes the awesome visuals.
Yes, of course. But this is a podcast, so you will see none of that. But yeah, Jeff, I'm gonna kick it over to you and let you kind of introduce this topic today.
Yeah. So hey, when we started this podcast, over a year ago, Craig and I talked, and we're like, hey, let's do a podcast. What should we talk about? And at the time we were sort of like, I don't even know, there's Coug podcasts out there. Let's just talk about, whatever. Let's talk about what's interesting to us. We'll talk some Cougs, we'll talk some beer. And one of the things we were like, we'll talk some politics. We'll talk about this, we'll talk about pop culture. I think at one point what did we do? We were like, recommend your favorite podcast that nobody's, I mean, we were like,
recommend a better podcast.
Yeah. So it was sort of like trying to figure out where we fit with the podcast. And, obviously we ended up settling in on talking almost exclusively about WSU. But, really the roots of what we thought was, we wanted to talk about stuff that really mattered to us, stuff that was really important to us, stuff that we thought was important in general. And that's kind of where we find ourselves this week, right? I mean, with everything that's going on in the country over the last, couple of weeks, starting with the death of George Floyd, and then up to, the last week or so of sort of mass demonstrations around the country. This is a moment, man. And, as I've mentioned on the podcast many times, I'm a high school teacher. I teach English, and I was, having a conversation with one of my kids over Zoom the other day. And I was just like, man, this is like this is so crazy. This is a moment in history that, people are going to talk about, people our age, you guys were a little bit younger than me at this time, but, I'm sure you remember the Rodney King riots, right? And so it's just sort of like, this is going to be, I think, one of those moments where, for the rest of our lives, we're going to look back at, 2020 with, COVID and these protests and, just whatever else goes on. I mean, it's the year's only half over. So this is an episode that sort of harkens back to where we started, which is saying, when something important's going on, we want to talk about that. And so we decided that we wanted to talk in some way about what was going on with the protests, about Black Lives Matter, about why Black Lives Matter, and things like that. There was initially some trepidation on our part with that because we're like, hey, we're a bunch of white guys, yay, we can high five each other while we talk about race, right? And that is most definitely what we did not want to do. Was to come off in some sort of the way that white people can, which is as some sort of white savior, coming down off the mountain to rescue black people. So we kind of wanted to start off by saying that is not our intent. What we're hoping to do through this is to have a frank and honest conversation, particularly with a particular focus on how white people can be allies and not just in thought, but in deed, in the things that we can do. And so, for me, I mean, I'll just give a little bit of background where I'm at. I am 43 years old. I am very white. I grew up in a very white community, and I really, mostly have white friends. So, this has been quite a journey for me to get to the point where I'm at here, but and I know that you two kind of share similar backgrounds, and I'll let you guys talk about those in a sec. But one of the big things that we just kind of wanted to talk about today was just how important this is, and how vital it is for people, for white people, to get involved and to start doing things, to merely not be non-racist, but to be anti-racist. That's sort of one of the big messages that's out there right now, is that black people say, look, man, we need white people to be not just non-racist, but anti-racist, actually actively working against racism. So, Craig, I'll throw it back to you. Why don't you share a little bit about kind of your journey toward understanding that this is just vital, and I think the phrase used earlier was moral imperative.
Yeah, absolutely. I just kind of a brief history of my experience with this topic is it really, I think back, even, this is a WSU podcast, but I think back to my time at WSU and really where it was thrown in my face, kind of the systemic racism in the U.S. For the first time really was at WSU, growing up in a predominantly white community with, I did grow up around like a lot of Hispanics and things like that, but, it didn't really register with me. But, the WSU comparative ethnic studies general education class, where basically they're just hitting you over the head with all of the stuff that the United States has done for, or that has happened since, for 400 years. That was pretty eye-opening for me at the time. I remember some people took it differently and were offended by, as white people, and thought, I had even friends that thought it was like just a white attack class. It was just an attack on whites class. And you're like, well, if you look at the history, it's hard not to do it. And then fast forward to, I moved to Nashville when I was in my mid-20s, and I worked at a group home with teens who were obviously in trouble with the law, and obviously a lot of black teens being in Nashville. And even just moving to Nashville was quite a different experience for me, moving from the Northwest, living in a city with, significant black neighborhoods interspersed, really seeing, realizing and understanding kind of how housing segregation has kind of manipulated neighborhoods in American cities for the first time, and then experiencing just kind of the secondhand experience of talking with my, the kids I worked with, the 15 to 18 year olds, and learning about what it was like for them. And there was always this one thing that stuck out to me, was this one kid, particularly difficult, if I'll admit, kid to work with, really hard to get through. But he was a black kid, a black teenager, and he said, he told me that he hates black people more than he hates white people. He doesn't trust black people, because basically all he had seen his whole life is people talking negatively about African Americans and the experience of being a black person. Like that just really hit with me, and it's always been something that I've carried with me, that him telling me that, and so when you get to this point, when something like this is happening, I tend to my online persona not stir up trouble like you do, Jeff. I usually kind of keep it pretty vanilla, but at this point, we're kind of at a crossroads, and like I said, it's just like kind of a moral imperative to where we should talk about our views on this, and what people can do, and kind of point to the voices that they should listen to, beyond ours, of course. if we're just kind of your first entry into this, if you're still listening, I think that's great. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, that just feeling the movement over the last week took me from trepidation to kind of excitement to jump on this.
Zane, where you at?
I feel very motivated to move from awareness to action, and I've been helped by the stories of people like Noah Williams and Gabe Marks, and in terms of hearing their experience. Similar to Craig and you, I mean, I grew up in a town that was majority white, school was majority white. The only exposure I had to any kind of systemic things is having a little brother with a physical disability, which exposes us to kind of like some of that. But really it was English classes in college and learning about things like the GI Bill and how that played out for people of color, specifically black people versus white folks. And so, at this point, I think, I've gone, I've tried rudeness with people that disagree with me and it hasn't worked. And I feel like I'm going from awareness to action, and looking for ways to just take tangible steps to provide more space for people of color, especially in this moment for black folks to share their experience and to really listen and think about what I can tangibly do next, and not ask people who aren't where I am to be where I am, because I wasn't always here. But in that, I'm also looking for ways to invite people to take that step with me. If that's buying a book to read to your kids that has black heroes in it, which is something my wife and I did this week, or if it's marching for the first time, which is something we did as well, or I reached out to the local police department just to try to get to know people there, because I realized, I've lived in my town for a few years now, and actually I've never even had to consider getting to know the police for any reason, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, they're just kind of around, and I guess if I need them, I'll call them. And so I'm just looking for ways to go from just being aware of what's going on and to try to be helpful, and be a good listener, and to ask thoughtful questions of the people in my life who maybe aren't where I am, in hopes that they feel invited to go on the same journey that I feel like I'm on, of really paying attention to these stories and really considering, why did Gabe Marks have such a different experience than me, or someone like Noah Williams, who grew up not far, really in the grand scheme of things, not far from where I grew up. How could he have such a different experience? And I'm just trying to listen to that and then think about what I can do.
Yeah. One of the things I kind of want to just, say for the listeners is, if you hear at any point during this a little hesitation and trepidation in our voice, look, these are tough conversations, right? Like this is, it's tough conversations. And I think the three of us are acutely aware of our limitations, like we certainly don't know shit about what it means to be a black person in this country. But I think that the three of us have also committed ourselves to listening. And I know that, this week with all the corporate statements, listening has been quite the catchphrase with a lot of the statements and things that corporations have written, or well-meaning people maybe have also written. So maybe what I'm kind of thinking is, maybe we could share together some of the things that each of us have done to listen. Because I think that, that there's listening has been around a lot here. And then, the word empathy is also being used a lot. And, one of the things I'm working on a column here that is taking me forever to finish. But, one of the things I'm kind of riffing on a little bit is the idea that, I think most people consider themselves empathetic. But the question is okay, so when you see, the George Floyd video, is your thought, wow, that's really sad? Or is your thought I'm nearly moved to tears, like that, maybe, or even moved to tears, right? Those things are kind of maybe two opposite ends of, maybe it's not opposite, but two different points on the like empathy continuum. And where you're at on that continuum, I tend to think is, I mean, some people are certainly just more naturally empathetic than others, but I also think that like, the more humanity you see in the person who's hurt, the more likely you are to be emotionally disturbed about it yourself. Like, and an easy analogy is, look, like, you're going to feel very differently about a stranger who dies versus like a close family member who dies, right? Like, you're going to feel very differently. Your empathy for other people is going to be very different in those instances. And so, one thing when I say listen, and I'm curious to hear, the way you two conceptualize it. For me, one of the things that I've done, I don't have a lot of Black voices in my actual day-to-day life. The principal of my school is a Black man who's an amazing leader and a wonderful guy, but he's still my boss, right? So it's not really like a close friendship. I can talk to him, but it's and we're, fairly close. I mean, we're okay, but it's like, still my boss, right? And there's some other Black teachers in my school, but they're not in my department. I don't interact with them a whole lot. And then my social circle, my church is very white, and it's just kind of like, okay, so lots of white people around me. So what I've had to do is I've had to go out and seek out Black voices. And for me, Twitter is sort of my primary source of those voices, where, I go and I follow, really, really smart people whose perspectives I find really important and insightful. So, people like Gene Denby, who is the host of Code Switch, the Code Switch podcast on NPR, people like Jamel Hill, people like Bomani Jones is another one, Clint Smith, who's a former educator, now kind of a activist, so follow a lot of really like smart, insightful Black people, because then you just sit back, and when their thoughts come across your feed, you can look at it and go, oh, that's how that person sees it. And you start to see, if you have enough of those people coming across your timeline, you start to see similarities. You start to see, similar viewpoints on certain issues and certain events. And you can use that information to start to sort of cull together this understanding of what it means to be Black in America. Because obviously I'm never going to stand that from a firsthand perspective, but, secondhand, in that way, reading that as much as possible and just sort of listening to it and being like, oh, those are the ways that I listen, the biggest ways that I listen. I mean, I do other things too. I watch movies and, like try to get some of those voices out of the way. But Twitter for me, honestly, has been, really invaluable, particularly since, my big trigger moment was, 2014 in Ferguson with Michael Brown. So, in that time, just really, again, reading, listening, and I think the key is also, as you read it, you got to put aside whatever preconceived notions you have about whatever, and you've just got to say that their experience is their experience and believe them. That's kind of the big thing that the other big piece of advice I would say is, okay, so once you've taken the step to seek out these voices, believe them. No what about, no yeah but, no like maybe you deserved it, like none of that. Just listen and believe them. So, Craig, what are your thoughts on that? How to listen better?
Yeah, in my day to day now, I would say like I again, like you, I don't interact with a lot of like Black people, but I try to, again, like reach out. I've in the past with like a previous job, I had previous jobs, I had coworkers and friends every day that were Black that I talked to, and I've reached out to them in this time and stuff just to kind of get their perspectives. But yeah, it's the same for me. It's just following people in my community on Twitter, people, smart people like you said, and I follow. I have a lot of respect for a young, he's a little bit younger than me, a journalist at the Tacoma News Tribune, Andrew Hammond. He's his perspective, and just he's not really afraid to kind of share his thoughts and feelings, and just seeing like the fear that he goes through watching all of this, and just he wrote an article about the moments with police that he's had where he's felt that terror of losing his life, and it's just something that if you speak with enough black people, you will hear the same stories again and again. How a traffic stop for them is probably not like a traffic stop for you. There's a whole different feeling when that police officer is approaching the vehicle, and so people like that, and to call it a Coug, Michael Sean Dugar, another great person to follow during this time, and find his perspective. And it's because of Twitter's nature, people, these voices are able to kind of share more, because it doesn't have to be a fleshed out like think piece. It doesn't have to be anything. It just can be kind of their raw feeling on things, and that's probably the most honest thing we can get from them. And really, if you're reading that stuff, you should be open. Like you should have an open mind to it, an open heart to it, even and like accept what they're saying and consider what they're saying, and kind of block out maybe some of the voices that are telling you maybe from your past or from other news outlets you get that are telling you maybe something different, or minimizing what they're saying. You should take what they're saying at face value, and kind of compare it to the mounds of data. It doesn't even take bars and graphs and charts. Like just look at what's going on, and like you can see that this era of cell phone video has illuminated something that previously was just stories that people were often too afraid to share. And that's something that we've kind of come across. I liken it a lot to what you hear from abuse survivors or rape survivors, where the person often fears retribution just by sharing their experience. And we saw that today with WC basketball player Jalen Shedd, in his statement he made about his coach at Texas State with his racist actions, and why he transferred. But he said in that statement that he was afraid to come out about it because he wanted to play basketball again his senior year somewhere, and he wants to coach eventually. And we've seen like the basketball coaching kind of community can be very kind of like protective of each other, and if you harm one of the, like we saw it obviously with like Bruce Pearl when he ratted out people for recruiting violations. Like he got kind of blackballed from the whole coaching profession for a few years. But like, and so you see Shedd like by throwing out these accusations at a coach, which we'll say that many people have confirmed in the rest, in the hours since. We should probably call that coach's name out. I don't have it in front of me right now, but he had that trepidation because he could feel like it might hurt him. Or for a lot of Black Americans, they probably don't come out with these stories because they didn't see a point. Like there was nothing that would help. And now this is a moment where they can come out with these stories and people will listen. And so I think we should listen to these stories like Noah Williams that he shared, and we can get into that too. I know, Zane, you probably want to talk about that too. So I'll throw it to you now, Zane. I think I've talked long enough, but how you've talked about how you want to listen, and that's kind of what When we were talking before we started recording, you were talking about how you really wanted to discuss how the voices that you've heard, that you've read in the past, week have kind of compelled you to action. So what it is about, like, what are these stories that you're hearing, and how are they compelling you to take action?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I mean, one of it was one of my, yeah, cards on the table. I don't have a super diverse network either. It's something I'm actively working on, where I'm just trying to make friends. I realize the Seattle freeze, I think, can sometimes be real, and we can get really comfortable. And so I've been trying to step out of my comfort zone and just go make new friends. But an old friend who is a black male, he actually connected me with 3 other white guys who had of his friends who had checked in on him during all of this, and he was basically like, "I'm just exhausted from talking about this, and so I need you to talk about what you can do as the people kind of in power to try to change things, and I'm kind of not able to really have this conversation right now." And I know that's not the case for all black people. Clearly, that's just the case for my friend. But hearing that was a moment where I was like, yeah, I can't just talk about this anymore. And I feel like I've consumed, or I can't just silently be upset. I can't just
Right.
look at things and say like, oh wow, that's really too bad that happened to that person. And so for me, it's just turned into trying to take those small steps every day, and when like seeing the Confederate flag being flown at like a counter protest, or when people were worried, maybe it wasn't even a counter protest, but when people were worried that looters were coming to a town nearby where I live, the people went out and demonstrated with guns, which is their right to do in this state, but they were showing white power symbols and showing the Confederate flag. And in the past, I would have just said, "Man, that's really sad." But instead, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to call the police department and I'm going to call the mayor, and I just want to be a voice so that my friends of color can take a break. And so, and simultaneously, I'm trying to recognize that I haven't always been in this place, and so I'm not trying to ask other people to necessarily be there, but I am trying to ask good questions about where they're at to invite them to take that first step, if that is like reading a book or following someone on Twitter, because I think we really have nothing to lose by listening and everything to gain. And there's just the reality that, in the same way, if someone tried to talk to me about the experience of someone with a disability having a brother that has one, I would have been, if I shared an experience, and this has happened, and they completely dismiss it or say that didn't happen, it's like, oh, okay. Maybe you're not a safe person for me then. And I just think
Right.
that at this point, we need to listen, and then we also need to turn that listening into action of some kind. So that's been the process for me. I mean, similar to you, like I've been highly influenced by people I follow on Twitter, by books I've read. A book I'm reading right now that is just helpful of understanding an individual's experience as a black person in primarily white environments. It's called I'm Still Here: Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. It's essentially her memoir, and so I'm reading things like that. I'm talking to friends and people in my community, and just asking, and thinking about what I can tangibly do and what we can tangibly do, and invite like my friends and acquaintances in the WSU community as well to figure out what their first step forward or their next step forward looks like.
Yeah, one of the big things, I think one of the cool things about this moment is that all of this is coming out kind of all at once, and lots of people are speaking all at the same time, which can be overwhelming. But also, again, if you're committed to listening, you're going to hear the same things over and over and over and over from so many different black people. Whereas if you just follow a bunch of people on Twitter like I do, and you go, over the last, 5-6 years, whatever it's been, and every once in a while you get
Right.
one of those stories, right? Every once in a while something trickles out about what it's like to be a black person in America, what it's what this is like, what that is like. it sort of, again, like I said, it trickles out. It's here and there. And so if you follow for long enough and you're, pay attention enough, you start to see these patterns. You start to see these things. You start to see these similar experiences from people. The moment we're in right now is like, man, you are getting a flood of black people saying, yep, that's what it's like. Yep, this is what it's like. Yep. And it's like, from a story you mentioned, Craig, you mentioned Michael Sean Dugar, he did a story on Bobby Wagner talking about, his experience as a black man. And then, a few days later, he's got a story on Russell Wilson talking about, right after he won the Super Bowl, he had a race-based incident in a freaking restaurant. Like, and then you've got, all these cougs, you got Gabe Marks talking about it. You got Makia Menace, a soccer player, talking about it. And you mentioned Jalen Shedd, basketball player, talking about it. And it's just sort of like, look, you have this incredible wave of black people saying like, no, this is real. This is my experience. I have experienced it. It's sort of at a point where, if you're not aware of it, you're at this point, you're being willfully ignorant, right? Like, right. Because if you're in, I understand there are some white people that hold extreme positions who have insulated themselves from any other viewpoint, which, we know that exists. But if you're a sports fan, and if you're listening to this, presumably you are, right? Like, you're presumably a WSU fan. Like, if you're a sports fan, WSU fan, you there's no way you could be insulated from this. Like it's out there. All these people, you love cheering for teams that are loaded with black people. So right. There's no way to miss this. And the other thing I'm kind of hearing over and over and over again is, do something. Right? Like don't, it's not enough. Listening's a good first step. Listening's good, but the time for listening is over. The time for being well-intentioned and being,
mm-hmm.
Moral support is over. And I understand that different people have different reasons for not getting involved, in actually trying to combat the effects of racism. And which is really what it comes down to, right? This is the anti-racist piece of this, right? You have to actually, you can't just be like non-racist. You can't like, well, I'm not racist. Okay. But what are you doing to stop racism? Because there is a system that has been built specifically to hold black people down, and it's undeniable. And if you do deny it, then, maybe do a little bit of learning, because it's there. The systems are in place to make for second-class citizens and keep white people in power. So it's the message I'm hearing, which is, again, maybe a little bit different than I've ever heard it before, is, look, man, white people control these levers. And the only way anything is going to change is if white people get up there and join the fight. Not like
right.
lead the fight, not like, save us, but like, yo, we need you next to us, because y'all are the ones who control that. And so if you're going to, because and I speak for the three of us, look, this is going to cost us something. There's an element of power and control that has to be let go of by the majority. And that for a lot of people is terrifying, whether they want to acknowledge it on a conscious level or not. It really is, this idea that maybe I won't, get mine if I lift somebody else up. And the reality is that we are needed in this fight. And that's a message that I really had not heard clearly up until this point. I tried to do little acts. I mentioned I'm a teacher, right? So, tried to do my best to amplify, black voices in my classroom, in my school, provide, the support that's necessary there, support the programs in my school that support, black kids who want to be academically successful, like AVID. If people don't know what AVID is, it's a program designed to help, first generation, targeting traditionally underserved populations, help them get to college. It's a great program. So really kind of trying to do those things. And then, I do retweets on Twitter, like, hey, you should read this, I finally figured out that's not enough, and that's not enough action. And so, Craig, what are some of the things, I'm curious, what are some of the things that you are either doing or plan to do to kind of to be anti-racist rather than just non-racist?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I've been trying to we have a little bit of a megaphone here, and I'm realizing that you know I can spread the right messages more through my Twitter account, through my Facebook account, through my Instagram, whatever. I can be more assertive in the language I use. And then another thing is there are organizations you can support. Obviously, Black Lives Matter. We talk about beer a lot on this podcast. You know, like Holy Mountain Brewing, which is fully run by a bunch of white dudes, but they're donating 10% of their sales to Black Lives Matter, King County this week, and you can do things like that. If we are the privileged class and we have the privilege of, you know, maybe having a more comfortable life because of that, if you do feel that you want to help other people, you can use that kind of literal benefit that you may have from your white privilege. I think of Jeff. I talked about it with you. There was this group of people, you know, denouncing their white privilege on on Twitter.
Right. There's this video of like hundreds of white people on their knees with their hands up denouncing their white privilege.
Which I know that it's well intended, whatever, and those people are on our side. Like they're but the thing is, like, if you believe that, you know, if you believe that in the existence of white privilege, you probably have benefited from that in some way. So if you're feeling guilty about that, like, go throw some money at the NAACP or any other, you know, if, you know, organizations that support Black trans people, because they have a really shitty time in life. They can have a really shitty lot in life. Organizations that just really, you know, even bail funds. The existence of bail itself is a pretty racist institution.
Absolutely.
So bail funds are something you can do. That's obviously money. If you can't do money, just advocating as a person, just living that life and stopping action racist action where you see it, like, you know, calling it out, and it can be difficult, and I've battled with it for years with my extended family that have largely I largely do not communicate with at this point, but yeah, you can be that voice if you don't have that money, if you don't have those resources, but and right now you can be a part of, you know, the protest, because there's clear evidence that the protests are having an impact.
Oh yeah,
like it's the charges have changed on George Floyd's case. Like the murder charge was upgraded on the officer, and then the 3 other officers have been charged. So it has an impact. We look at. I'm going to be curious watching a case in Tacoma where a black man was killed in the same way that George Floyd was, using a similar type of hold, causing asphyxiation and death. Obviously, it's not the same exact situation, but it still is. There's a point where there's no reason why he should have died in that moment. So you have to look at it. Why did he die in that moment?
Yeah, and I think the key is here, you know, that you're hitting on is you got to like do something, right? Like and you got to ask yourself if what you're doing is actually going to be the sort of thing that's going to have a tangible effect. And you know, we were sort of making fun of the people, but I mean, like, again, getting on your knees and putting your hands up and renouncing your white privilege, like, okay, I mean, nice gesture. And there are a lot of statements that have come out that are nice gestures and well-intentioned. I mean, we had a pretty good debate on Kook Center Slack earlier this week about Nick Rolovich's statement. And I don't want to get too deep into that here, parsing all of his words, but I do know that his statement, again, from listening to the black voices that I follow, his statement did not land with the black community. And it was, again, well-intentioned, and he did the whole, I choose love or I choose good or whatever it is. But it's like, it was all a whole bunch of like, what does that actually mean? What does that actually do? Like do something tangible. And don't just, do something that seems symbolic or is, extremely vague. The more concrete we can be, the better. Zane, I know you talked a little bit earlier about some of the concrete things you were doing. I mean, I don't know if you kind of said all you had to say on that, but, if there's anything you wanted to expand on that, just, and I guess maybe for our listeners, what are some, really simple, first steps. I mentioned, following people, listening to people, reading them, trying to imagine their experience, believing them when they say something. I know you're doing a ton of tangible steps. So what are some simple things that people can do to try and, or that you have found particularly effective, to try and, be anti-racist?
As a dad, I'm trying to just expose my children to content that prominently displays black people as the hero.
Huge.
If you think about like those of us growing up, consuming Disney movies or just everything. I mean, they're almost completely absent.
Yep.
At least in any way of being a prominent figure that you would look to and say, wow, I want to emulate their behavior.
And everybody's pretty aware, I think, at this point of the fact that the villains tend to be darker skinned.
Right.
In the old Disney movies.
Right, yeah. And so...
Not even that old.
Not even that old. Maybe like in the last 15 years, right?
Zane and I were kids.
Right. Yeah. And so, like this weekend... which I don't know when this will air, probably after this weekend, but I mean Sesame Street is holding like a conversation on race, right? And so there's ways to expose your children to it that are age appropriate to, at the very least, plant those seeds that it's not just white people that are the hero. And there's tons of evidence in the world, right, that it's not just white people that are the hero. I think that's sometimes why white folks can have this white savior complex when they try to enter into this conversation or issue, is because we're really trained subconsciously to view ourselves that way, just because that's like all the movies, the action heroes, it's all white men mostly.
The movies, the history books, the novels that we read in school,
right.
All of it.
So that's a step that we're taking, which is new for us, right? It's not something that we have always done. It's not something that, from day one we were really focused on exposing our kids to those types of things. But that's an example of a step we're taking. The biggest thing I believe personally, the only way out of this is through friendship and through thoughtful questions. And so I'm trying to use the skills that I've developed in my line of work to ask good open-ended questions, to try to take things out of the comments section on a Facebook post and into the direct messages, into text messages, into phone calls, so that we can remove like the need to be right and instead try to just be vulnerable with whatever our motivations are in sharing what we share, or whatever our reasons are for thinking what we think, and trying to just have conversations and actively listen is another step that I'm trying to take. And in my journey for where I'm at, I think those are great things. but I also am feeling the need to take the step to just like I messaged my local police department on Facebook and just asked if there was a police officer willing to meet with me off duty on the phone to just talk so I could get to know them. So I think all of those things are just steps to take, as well as, we tried to, we bought dinner recently from a black-owned restaurant, like on purpose, not just because they have great food, which the food was amazing. Shout out to Carolina Smoke in Bothell.
That sounds
But
good.
yeah, it was very good. So I think like some of the sentiment I have felt and some of the sentiment that I have heard from other people is that this issue can feel really overwhelming and they're not sure what to do. And it's not going to get solved in a day. It's not going to get solved in a year. It's probably not going to be solved in a decade. It's going to take, though, I think, localized decisions that we all can make as individuals to stand in the gap for people and to be good friends and good community members together. And so whatever that looks like, which it might just be saying hello and striking a conversation up with a stranger, to try to let them know overtly that you're glad they're in your community and that they matter to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Zane, all right. So I kind of want to riff on that idea of asking questions or having other people ask questions. Okay, so one of the main retorts from a number of people in a number of corners of the internet is when we say Black Lives Matter, of course it's, well, don't all lives matter, right? And so, maybe we could go down the road of some of those distracting, counter arguments. So, for example, when you say, "Yeah, like I'm seeking out black businesses to spend my money," what if somebody says to you, "Well, white businesses need money too. I mean, isn't that discriminatory to go spend your money at a black business? Like isn't that reverse discrimination? I mean, what would you say to that?"
There's a great resource. I'm forgetting her name right now. I believe her first name is Jane. She helped do the class divided stuff. There's no possible way for reverse racism to be a thing. Racism means that you have power to institutionalize beliefs to oppress and suppress people. So there's no reverse racism of supporting a black-owned business. I am also not saying I am anti-white-owned businesses in
Right.
making that statement or act. The reality is that there's things like redlining that blocked black and brown people from even living in neighborhoods. There's been discriminatory practices around business loans or loans of any kinds for a long time that have made it not just a disadvantage for people of color or black people to start their own business, but the system has actively worked against them. And so, I would ask a question to someone. If someone brought that statement to me, I would say to them, what emotion are you feeling by me choosing to support a black-owned business? I mean, and then I would just ask more open-ended questions around what's behind that. Because ultimately, I think they may not even know, they may not even be able to articulate it. They might just be expressing some level of fear that they're going to lose something. And I think we as human beings are very motivated by not losing that which we already have. And I would just seek to understand what would cause you to even say something like that, because it really would feel like a straw man and rather disingenuous. And I think that in the past, I have gone very hard at those types of statements in a way that is not productive or helpful. And what I'm trying to do now is to, and even if you're a listener on this and that's something you would say, to seek to understand what's behind that. Even though my initial response is that I would be frustrated and wanting to attack, to instead seek to understand in hopes that we can have a conversation that helps you take a step to where I am, where I think that it's a beautiful thing to tell people that they matter, not just with words, but with actions.
Well, yeah, I think what you're talking about, Zane, I love the way you frame that, where asking, what does that make you feel? The thing that we can do as allies is kind of take that part of it out of the equation for the actually affected class, the black people, like it's the people of color, and because they shouldn't have to ask some white person why they're offended that they're advocating to buy from a black restaurant, right? But maybe we as allies can be the ones that do that to provide that to provide that doorway in. Because like I wouldn't want any person like who's been dealing with systemic racism their whole life to have to hear about how someone is hurt because you have decided to buy from a black restaurant. Like that, they should not have to deal with that. But we as the allies in this situation, who don't have the direct experience, we can kind of bear that brunt and be the ones that handle those people who are not at our level yet, but maybe are open to moving this way.
Yeah, and really one of the things that you find is a lot of these arguments that come the other direction are not really, they're not good faith arguments, right? It's black people are flooding the streets in unprecedented numbers to protest, and what about the poor business owner what about the poor Target whose windows was smashed, right? like what the fuck do I care about Target? Like they've got they've got insurance up to their eyeballs, like they're gonna be fine. I'm not really worried about Target. Of course, like nobody thinks that is good. Like nobody's like, yes, violence and looting is good. But at the same time, and look, you can get dragged down a rabbit hole arguing about, well, who's really doing the looting, right? Like, is it really the protesters, or is it, far right agitators, or is it, whatever. But whenever you get dragged into that kind of an argument, you're missing the point, right? And I had somebody on Twitter, God, it feels like a week ago now, but it was probably 2 days ago. Kind of went like basically referring to, the looting and burning of buildings. And it's like, yeah, but what about this? And I'm like, I guess I would ask. And I actually went down the Zane path, because sometimes I have to like take a step back and breathe for just a sec. Cause, as it's funny, like when I'm in the classroom, I'm really good at taking a deep breath and thinking of a thoughtful question to prod a kid. When I'm on Twitter, like a lot of other idiots, like all I want to do is go, "You're wrong, you suck," and I just want to like shout them down. But in this case, I tried to take a deep breath and tried to ask it. One of the things I asked was just like, hey, why is an inanimate object more important to you than a human? And it's like, I'm like, really kind of think about what led you to the conclusion that you're more worried about a building that can be rebuilt than about the loss of life. These people are in the street because somebody died, and somebody who did not need to die, right? And he ended up dying, and it's like, well, a building can be rebuilt. I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before. Longtime readers of Kook Center know this. Like, I had a son with cancer. Okay. Like, that was, that was a tremendous financial burden on our family, and we lost lots of objects through that process. And I wouldn't trade one of them for the life of my son. Right. So, if your brain is such that the calibration is, man, I'm more worried about that building or that business than I am about that person. I would suggest that maybe you need to think about that just a little bit.
And I think, I agree with what you're saying.
Also, let Nordstrom just hire people to clean the side of their building. You don't have to go do that for them.
Right. That. And one of the things that I have been thinking about as I've seen some of these smaller communities, like the town next to me, both of the cities that border me had people go to the streets with long guns to demonstrate. Because there was rumors of looters coming to those towns, and
Antifa, the very organized,
right,
organization of Antifa.
And I've been thinking about that of like, man, what would drive me to take such a like that's a big choice in my opinion to that's not something I've ever seen in my life in an American city, or at least in a city around where I live. And I thought, I bet the fear that those folks probably felt when those rumors came out that there's people coming to this city with the purpose to destroy it, and that fear of what is going to happen to us right now that would cause them to go to the street with guns to try to discourage that and intimidate that away. That fear that they felt, the feedback I've gotten from like black and brown friends is that like that's the fear they live with every day of what is going to happen to us. And when I hear that, it's the looting and all of that, obviously, I don't want to see violence at all, but I hope that if you are listening to this still and you're feeling that tinge of fear or uncertainty of what is going to happen as all of this stuff is going on, I hope that builds empathy and understanding with the folks who that may be their daily life, that may be just their reality of wondering, are they going to get the police officer that shows up who is accepting of them or is not? Or are they going to have the neighbor who is accepting of them or not? Or are they going to have the job interviewer who is accepting of them or not? And, I see that and that's what I'm hopeful that eventually we can connect the dots for those community members or friends or family members who have chosen to demonstrate in that way. Because I really do think that that's just a small window for them or us who are really freaked out right now into what is the daily experience of many of the people that we support on the football field for WSU or on the basketball court or the soccer field, or that are in our community. That is what their life is often just like.
I think that's well put, Zane, and again, that's an excellent use of your of listening to what other people are telling you, and and at the same, you can acknowledge those people's fear, but you can also acknowledge that there's some misinformation that's headed their way, and
yeah, those reports are erroneous, and you are being tricked by gun store owners or by white nationalists. So do not go into the street. They're not coming to loot your antique store.
Well, I mean, there was a story about a family getting trapped while camping in Forks because they were driving an old bus. They'd driven it from Spokane, and the locals in Forks became, and this is Forks, the northwesternmost corner of the state, right?
Yeah, it was picked to be in twilight because it was I believe the least sunny days of anywhere in the United States.
And there ain't shit out there. Like I've
gone
out there
except twilight memorabilia at every store.
And so apparently some of the locals thought that these people, it was a bus full of Antifa coming to destroy their town, and it's
Forks.
like to Forks.
But
right?
to get to Forks, you have to, and I saw someone mention this on Twitter, you have to drive through larger cities of Port Angeles and Sequim
right.
to even get to Forks.
Right. So, and I mean, we laugh, but it's not really funny, right?
No, it's not funny at all. It's terrifying.
It's like we giggle because it's like, holy shit, like how? But it's like you said, it's terrifying, right? I mean, somebody's going to get shot. Somebody's going to die because of this.
Well, yeah, we've talked about the positive part of like social media. Twitter has helped us, but there's obviously a negative part of Facebook and social media and Facebook, but that
mostly
really,
Facebook.
Yeah, mostly Facebook. That has, because really all the crazy people on Twitter are bots mostly.
Most of them.
We've shared some posts from like people we went to high school with and people where they've just you see like people that maybe you don't agree with politically, but you still kind of thought they were of sane mind and maybe were even like educated and stuff, but just fall victim to to things like this, and that's why it's important to listen to people, and like it's you can't just be getting from the same voices all the time, and they have an agenda in some way that they're, I don't know what it is. I think what you talked about, there is something to lose if we as the whites are no longer in power. There are some benefits that we stand to lose if there's equality, right? And again, and I want to point out that that's what, like, Black Lives Matter, the movement is just about equality, and even it's not even just about raising up black people. It's about raising up immigrants and LGBTQ and plus and all that. So it's not such a singular movement as you might think, but this is just something that I'm kind of losing my train of thought here, but like you said, we're going to hesitate to say things.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, look, the amount to be lost is not nearly as great as people fear.
Exactly.
It's not like, oh my God, we're going to be overrun, like the white supremacists think, right? Like that is absolute 100% white supremacist doctrine that, that white people will be overrun by minorities and that they will in turn subjugate us, right? That is what's coming. That and in some ways is a really crazy kind of fucked up psychology, because it's almost like saying, like, yes, we are aware of the atrocities that we have perpetrated, and we are fully expecting that those atrocities will be perpetrated on us if it's ever given an opportunity. I mean, look, that's not what this is about. And so the fear of losing whatever it is that's going to be lost, I think is ridiculous and completely insane. And yeah, like there may be some, and I don't know what it is, a little bit of power, maybe a little bit of, I mean, I don't know, like, I don't know what that is, but it's like, man, if I got to give up a little bit of power so that somebody else's humanity, basic humanity, can be recognized and fulfilled, I mean, my gosh, like that's
well, I mean, for us,
no-brainer.
yeah, I mean, for us as like general, like I don't even know, like if black and brown people feel safer and are more empowered and that we live in a more equitable society, I understand that there potentially are things that I may lose out on, like maybe, but at the same time, it's like I don't even know what that is, and it's
Nope.
it's like you can't even really articulate it other than as like this nebulous thing, when people try to get into those kinds of
Right.
arguments.
Right.
And it's something that is it's kind of like if you why are we even thinking about that?
Right.
It's not.
It's why white supremacists point to like things like way of life, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, America won't be America anymore if
Right.
blank, right?
Can I just kind of just something in between the white supremacists we're talking about and between the Black Lives Matter movement is on the kind of it's on the kind of the liberal side is this this idea that and I think you talked about it with Nick Rolovich's statement is not seeing color.
Oh yeah.
And that is just a patently absurd notion. Like it's you can't, like, that that is not anti-racist to say that you don't see color, because one, it's a lie unless you're colorblind or blind.
Or blind, like literally blind.
But at the same time, like like there's cultural cues, there's different cues that people take that they find, just the way people use language and things like that. So it's like just saying I don't see color is nonsense. And like,
Well, let's start here. Only white people say that.
yes, of course. And Jeff, I think I told you a story of like this a couple of my two probably best friends I made in grad school, and my best friend I made in grad school was I think his father was Chinese descent and his mom was white, and so he was half Chinese. He was obviously visibly Asian or whatever, and so he had, like even like when he was growing up, like he tended to make Asian friends more, because that's the groups that because people see color, and so he aligned with that. And so we had this other friend he's a great guy, and like honestly he was well meaning, and a lot of these people don't mean ill when they say this, but we were having some beers and we were discussing race and whatever, as people of color tend to always have to do when they're hanging out with white people. Honestly, I'm sorry to all my friends who aren't white. I drag you into topics of race every single time, which is my fault, not yours. But he says something like, well, I just try not to see color and all this stuff. And we kind of, me and my friend, my friend that, Chinese friend, they with the Chinese dad, he's just like, we just kind of like, dude, no, like that's ridiculous. You can't, like, you obviously like look at Jamie, that he's not white. Like it's like, and that's how he is able to be discriminated against. Like, and a black person doesn't get to say, I don't see color, because guess what? The people that are discriminated against them can see the color. Like, they see it and they judge them by it. Mm-hmm. And that's where it is. And that's kind of the middle. Like, if you're in that point, if you're listening to this and you're in that point, think about that. Like, think about on the other side. Like if a black person or an Asian person or a Hispanic person, like if they said, I don't see color, what would it be like for them, right? Like is that really how they live their life?
And I think it's okay. And I think it's okay to, and I think within that to like, as the people in the positions that we are in of privilege, I think when you're saying I don't see color, I think most people are probably trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And it's okay for us to be humble enough to try to do the right thing and accept the feedback that we missed the mark.
Right.
And so for those of for those of us who maybe say, oh, I don't see color, and you get the feedback that, hey, that actually, I what I want more than anything right now is to feel seen. And when you say that, it makes me feel that I'm not seen, that it's okay. Like, hey, you took a step, but now the feedback was, I need you to go in a different direction. And that's where I think it's on us as white folks to listen and then take that step forward into, okay, well, if saying I don't see color makes you feel unseen, then how can I make you feel seen? And listening to that feedback and then taking those steps, because I would agree with everything you said, Craig, and everything you've said, Jeff, that it is hopefully out there enough that saying that is not the route to go, and that while it is well-meaning, the feedback is that it's not hitting the mark. And that's really on us to listen to that feedback and accept that and know that we're going to make mistakes as we go through this process and journey, and that you just can't stay where you're at. And you got to just keep moving forward in accepting feedback and trying to move forward. Because I would gather there's not a lot of Kook Center listeners, hopefully, who are white supremacists, right? There's probably a lot of who are on that journey, and that's, I think, what has been helpful to me, where I have just had the kindest people of both professors and friends who have been like, Zane, I see what you're trying to do here, but that's not actually helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we have an opportunity to step up in amplifying the voices of the people who are saying, hey, that actually wasn't helpful, in hopes that our friends will listen.
Well, and that's why we've talked about, actual, tangible steps, right? Things like amplifying Black voices, listening to Black voices. A couple things we haven't talked about much, but other things you can do is, seek out, Black voices in other formats, books, movies, right? Build those relationships with the Black people in your life. Seek out relationships with Black people, not necessarily for the purpose of, having a Black friend, but
at entry level, just like consume the stuff that guys like Jordan Peele make.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a really easy way to get into it. Like it's like things like that. Like you're not hit over the head, but like if you have an open mind, you're going to get some message there.
And I think it's important to note that the action is what's important. Sometimes you're going to whiff, and I will guarantee by the time we get to the end of this, if a person of color wants to be brutally honest with us, they will point out somewhere where one of us stepped in it, right?
Oh yeah.
Like I'm sure, I am positive we did, or we will, or whatever. But it's like it's too important to not try, and that's kind of what we're going for here. Because look, the conversation around Rolovich's statement was, well, he means well. And it's like, okay, but it sort of comes back to like, the larger conversation here is who gets the benefit of the doubt for things, right? Like, one of the issues with our racial inequality is who gets the benefit of the doubt. Oh, well, he means well is usually a thing reserved for white people, right? And to be honest, look, we are in this position because there were a lot of well-meaning white people. Look, we didn't get in this position entirely because of racists. We didn't get in this position entirely because of white supremacists. We got in this position because of a lot of, well-meaning white people who didn't want conflict, or were willing to just sort of go along with it, or thought to themselves, hey, if I just do, these things kind of behind the scenes, and, if I retweet some Black people once in a while, I'm doing my part, right? It's okay to be well-meaning, but you have to ask yourself if your well-meaning thing is actually accomplishing anything. And like another example of that is, and look, our affinity for Kyle Smith is well known on this podcast. Like, we adore Kyle Smith, and Jalen Shedd, who we talked about earlier with the racist coach at Texas State, followed that up by saying his experience playing with Kyle Smith was one of the best experiences of his basketball career. Like, he loves Kyle Smith. So I am not calling into question Kyle Smith's intentions or anything else. But Kyle Smith put out a statement basically saying like, hey, I've heard this, I'm listening. I understand that, some of my players have been affected by this, which was, pretty obvious reference to Noah Williams, right?
Right.
And he tried to take an actionable step, which is what we want, right? Like, it's commendable. He says, okay, like he talked to the Pullman Police Department, and they agreed to, as a first step, have a dialogue about, whatever, right? Relationship between police and Black people or whatever. And I'm like, great. That's good. That's a good intention. However, I've been a Coug long enough now to know, how many times there has been dialogue between the Pullman Police Department and the Black community in Pullman. It's because the students change every 4 years, right? This is a thing that has happened multiple times over the time that I've been associated with WSU, 2.5 decades. It seems to be a thing that happens over and over and over. Oh, we're going to talk about it. And the root of it maybe never really reach, it seems, a second step where it's like, okay, so we talk and typically, and maybe this is a good kind of gateway for us to talk about policing just a little bit before we wrap up, because we've been talking for a while. But, I'm fairly familiar with how some of these dialogues have gone in the past in Pullman, and they have typically been the police telling the Black people what their perspective is as police people and how the Black people can not run afoul of the police department. Like, that's typically how those conversations have gone. And so, it's great to have a first step as a dialogue. I understand, like, we got to talk first, but there needs to be some sort of actionable a thing that follows that up. And if you're on Twitter at all right now, and you follow any sort of news source or whatever, it's impossible to miss what's happening in the streets. And This may not be, again, a popular opinion with some of our listeners. I don't know, but hopefully if you're still listening, you'll hear us out on this. It certainly seems at this point like police are a pretty big part of the problem and not part of the solution, which is something that, of course, black people have been telling us for like a century.
Well, yeah, and I talked about earlier about the man in Tacoma who has recently come to light, and who was died in this similar hold that George Floyd died in, and that's a part of policing, and why are they ignoring when someone says I can't breathe? And that goes back to Eric Garner in New York, and there's some like fundamental things that seem to happen, and you see pop up in different police departments in different parts of the country, where like this is just must be a cultural thing of police. And now we see with the protests, like really if you break it down to the simplest fact, like these protests are a protest against the police, and how they have chosen in many places and to handle it is by coming out in full-on riot gear and standing in the way of the protesters and blocking them from going places, and then throwing tear gas and flash bombs. And it's there's this from my view, what it seems like is these protesters are met with the same sort of the same way that kind of black people feel they're always met with police, is that they're automatically everyone's a perpetrator, everyone is the bad guy, and we'll start as them as the bad guy and move from there, and they're treated like a criminal or whatever from the get-go. And so we've seen this play out with the protests, like repeatedly. The slightest, they'll say that there was a bottle thrown at us. Well, you're wearing like football pads. Like, why do you care if a bottle hits you? Like, does that? And then they don't know who threw it. They throw tear gas into the crowd, like, and which we know goes against like what they're supposed to do. Like Seattle has been the Seattle Police Department in particular has been under a lot of scrutiny for a decade. So like we know that they're not supposed to just lob tear gas into a crowd when they don't know who threw the bottle or whatever. But you see that these protests can go on and be peaceful until the police are introduced. And there seems to be this misunderstanding that like this protest is like against the way police are treating African Americans. Like, why are you showing up with force? Like, why do you think that would why like that's the opposite of de-escalation? You are escalating the crowd immediately,
particularly
when you show
in
up.
direct contrast to what happened the week before, right? Like with all the protests over stay-at-home orders.
Exactly.
People show up and it's, they show up because they want a haircut, and okay, the police just stand there and take the yelling and whatever else. And then what's different this time? And again, there are people who would argue, police are there to control violence. There are people breaking windows. And I don't know, man, I'm looking at my timeline and I'm seeing, there's a guy who's got a thread of about 250 different incidents of, police unprovoked brutalizing people.
Well, and I read
these aren't people like breaking windows. These are people just marching in a street.
I read a good thread today on the the protests in New York City, and they had an 8 p.m. curfew. And they basically, this guy's like, okay, we were protesting from 1 to 8. And then 8 o'clock, we were seeing the messages like curfew, blah, blah, blah. So we try to go home, and they're walking towards the subway, and police are stopping them, arresting them. It's like, well, they're walking away. Like, they don't know where they're going. Like, you're treating them like they're not giving them an ability to, like, and that's when, you know, the rioting happens, is when they step in. And like, there was a march that went right by my house yesterday, and it was very peaceful. And the only cops I saw were 2 blocks ahead of the march on motorcycles, basically just stopping at intersections, telling people it's coming, telling them to go a different way. Right in front of my house, and I kind of felt, I was out in front, and I was, you know, watching it and kind of, you know, partaking in the chants and everything, and had my daughter out there, and but I was going to go back inside because I could tell they were kind of getting ready to peter out, but one of the leaders comes on and says, "Okay, everyone stop, and they stop and they turn around, and she goes, "We went a little too far. We have to turn around and go back." No police officer had to tell them to do that. They did it on their own. No police intervened. It all happened very peacefully. Like, a lot of these protesters aren't out like looking to cause trouble, but the way that the protests are being handled by authorities are causing more trouble.
Yep.
And like these, like, it's obviously protesting is a basic right guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution, but it doesn't feel like it the way that, like, police are handling the protests right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes back to sort of the foundational element of policing, which is that police are essentially there to maintain order for the majority, for those in power. There's a great podcast that
protect property,
right? Protect and who owns the property, right? Yeah. Like, not the people marching in the streets. You know, there was a great podcast I listened to today from NPR called Throughline. It's a podcast they do about sort of the historical through lines that lead us up to today. And they did one on policing, which again was superior, and you should go listen to it if you want to understand a little bit more about how we got to this point with policing. But, you know, really the origins of policing in this country, there haven't always been police in this country. You know, colonialists didn't have policemen. The police were introduced with the introduction of slavery. They were slave patrols, essentially, to you know, keep the slave population under control, to avoid an uprising against the white slave owners. So it's not too crazy to see how we end up at this point. And, you know, I guess what's super wild about it is that so much of it is on video, and they don't care. You know, there's all these incidents on video of just things that you can't explain. And again, you know, I see some people twisting themselves into a pretzel, trying to explain away what was there. Oh, well, you didn't see the 15 seconds before that. You don't know what happened. Well, again, who gets the benefit of the doubt and why? And I would just encourage people, just as I said, you know, trust the Black voices, listen to them, believe them, right? Like, believe your eyes. Like, when you look at one of these videos and you see, you know, 150 people trapped on a hillside trying to get away, but there's a fence and the police are just firing canisters of tear gas repeatedly at them from behind, believe your eyes. Like, that is what it looks like. You know, when the video that was going around Twitter tonight of some policemen in Buffalo shoving an old man down, and he cracks his head on the pavement and he starts bleeding, and the police just keep walking by, right? Like, nobody stops to see if he's okay. They just keep going. Believe what you see there. There is no more context needed. Zane, you know, Craig and I have been talking a whole bunch here, but, you know, you talked about some of the things that you're doing, you know, to talk to your police station. So maybe, you know, expand on that just a little bit, but also, like, just from a philosophical level, One of the things that's floating around Twitter right now that's kind of a buzzword is defund the police. Maybe just, and I don't know if you have very strong thoughts on that, but maybe like explain a little bit about what that is and what maybe some of the alternatives are to policing that we could be looking into, instead of this cycle of, hey, let's train the police better, and surely things will get better, and they really never do.
Yeah, my motivation in trying to get to know them is my hope that if they know me and we become friends, that hopefully there's a drop in the bucket of building trust with me, and that my worldview of trying to be accepting, if they do not hold that, I can potentially help in some way. I think a statement I've heard in the past is, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. And I think that that's what a lot of people are kind of seeing right now when it comes to some of the behaviors of certain police departments, that they're not acting in ways that are trying to build trust with the community. They're kind of viewing the community as the enemy. So the whole concept of defunding it is just looking for, it's not to take things away from them of like it's more of like, how can we reallocate. I guess, I mean, in some ways it is trying to take things away, but it's more just how can we reallocate the resource of our tax money to make a community that is not fearful of those who are charged to serve and protect us. And they have an incredibly hard job, and they have a job that I do not understand. I've never had to do, and I've been really impressed by the police in the town that I live in. They have joined the protests. They have held signs. They've brought their families out to meet people. And I think that is what I would love to see happen across the rest of the country, but is unfortunately what is not happening. And I think it was interesting, like my wife and I and our kids, like we marched for the first time ever and held signs in our town. And I felt this like pitter patter in my heart of like, man, I know there's going to be people who aren't going to like this. But I felt safe because earlier in the week there were other people who had demonstrated, and there was a similar experience to like what you described, Craig, in Tacoma, where like the police were helpful, or at least were not interfering. Right. And it's just it's concerning and sad to see that not be the case everywhere else. And it's a problem. It's a massive problem. It's a crisis, I would say, even. And I don't think any of us like are here saying we're not trying to peanut butter spread that like all people are this way or that way, but it is a problem when police show up not wanting to listen, but are instead looking at the people who are just trying to peacefully share their views as folks who need to be pushed around or gassed. And so, yeah, I think I'm processing in real time a lot of these thoughts, to be honest. I mean, like I mentioned earlier on, like I had never even really thought about engaging with police because my life is so privileged that like I wouldn't ever even need to call them, really. Like there was a spat of people prowling cars last year, and our neighborhood like freaked out, and I was kind of like, I don't know, like whatever, I don't have anything in my car worth stealing. And that's like the only instance where I felt the need to even been around people who were like, oh, we got to call the police about this. So it's one of those things where I'm again just trying to listen and learn, and like you said, Jeff, believe my eyes that there are clearly things that need to change in regards to how our communities are served and protected. Yeah. And I'm trying to do my part to get to know them, to ask good questions around things like implicit bias and de-escalation training, and make sure that those things are in place. I have another friend who lives in a different city in a different state, and she was saying, due to COVID, like it's actually really hard to even get training in the door to help right now. So it's like I couldn't imagine a worse scenario where you have all of these protests going on, and it's harder to get trainers to come in and actually talk about those things. And that's where I think what we're seeing from the protests is real change can happen if we speak up. And so if you're concerned or just curious, I would encourage you to talk to your leaders and ask good questions around how they approach things like de-escalation or what the policies are on wearing body cams, to make sure that those policies are followed, and so that the police who are there to actually serve and protect can do that, and those who are there to not get rooted out.
Yeah, and I'm of, I appreciate your perspective, and I am more on the train of, like, slash that budget. Like, I'm like, let's put that money somewhere else. And I do, to give a bit of the benefit of the doubt. Look, police are not generally put in like winning positions. I guess I would say like they are asked to deal with a lot of societal ills that they are frankly completely and totally not equipped to deal with, and we're seeing,
which I'm sure you as a teacher can.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about that. I mean, look, we have a school resource officer who, I don't interact with him very much, but he is on our campus from, time to time. It's not all day, every day, but he's on our campus. And, it has always made me a little bit uneasy because I'm like, do we really need a cop here? And part of it also is, I mean, look, he shows up and again, I'm sure that they feel like they have a good reason for doing this, but I mean, he shows up dressed up in his, his sheriff's, jumpsuit, gun on his side, and he's got his belt full of tools and whatever. And, he's clearly wearing some sort of protective vest underneath. And I mean, he's just, he looks like he's dressed up in a suit of armor. Right. And he's a white guy. And it's just like, like, is this really needed? And, he spends some time talking to our staff one time about, needing to, what we need to think about with active shooter situations. And frankly, that's a thing that teachers, as you can imagine, don't like to think about very much. But, just sort of his whole worldview was everybody around him is a potential suspect, basically. And he was encouraging us to be aware of our surroundings and look around and be looking for potential threats. And I'm like, bro, we do not look at the world we cannot look at the world that way. Like, I'm sorry. Like, we cannot look around at our 30 students and say, which one of these kids might shoot me? Like, you can't. Right. And I'm like, but that offers a glimpse into the worldview of policing where everyone's a potential suspect, everyone's a potential perp. And it's just sort of like, it's not healthy. And there are lots and lots and lots of societal places where that's not a healthy outlook and that's not a healthy approach. And school is one of those places. And look, I teach in a district where it's not exactly a school to prison pipeline. I mean, let's be real about that. But there are lots of other places where it is, where kids, the kids who are arrested at school are disproportionately black, and, that's just the direction it goes. But there are lots of other things too. I mean, we think of all the things we ask police to do. We ask them to do things like homelessness. We ask them to take care of things like mental health distress calls. We ask them to talk about, to deal with domestic violence. Like, these are things they are fundamentally not equipped to do. And we ask them to do things like, crowd control at a protest. And again, when your viewpoint is that every person out there is a potential threat, that every person out there is a potential, perpetrator, you get what you've gotten. That's what you get. And that's why force becomes the default. That's why black people die in white cop custody because they are seen as a potential threat. I mean, look, I think you mentioned, the person in Tacoma who died in police custody. I mean, I read the story.
Emmanuel Ellis.
Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't said that.
Yeah. So I read the story about him, and as part of the police report, they talked about how he picked up a police officer by the vest and threw him down like a rag doll or something like that. I mean, I can't remember the exact wording, but that was in the actual police report. And I'm thinking, really? Like you want me to believe that happened? Like, really? I mean, in the whole, black people have superhuman strength is sort of that's a through line all the way back to slavery, basically. But it's like, what we need to do is reallocate resources. Like there are look, do police need to investigate murders? Yes. Like we need police to do that, right? Like, I mean, do we need police to make sure people aren't speeding? Maybe more speeding cameras would do the trick. I don't know. But it's like, do we need police for certain functions? Yes. Are we asking them to do way too much? Yes. And are we putting them in positions where we are inviting conflict? Yeah. When we have them go and, we institute a curfew, I mean, the whole point of a curfew is to create conflict. Like, let's be real, right? Like, that's to
Absolutely.
set up a situation where police have to enforce something. So,
and that it gives them an opportunity to, like, it sets up a situation where people are, quote, breaking the law, like, even unintentionally. And that's where it was. I was talking about with the example of the people in New York protesting until 8 and there weren't police around, and then suddenly at 8, like cop cars were coming in.
Yeah.
And
there are examples of the cops boxing protesters in also and not letting them leave. And then it hits 8 o'clock and then it's like, okay, here come the arrests, right? It's
on a bridge.
Yeah. And it's, and there are examples also around the country of police essentially vacating the protests and magically there's no violence.
Yep.
Right.
And like, I saw it with my own eyes in front of my house. Yeah. Like and obviously that protest was not the scale of the protests on Capitol Hill in Seattle or in New York City or whatever. But at the same time, a lot of the people that are heading out with a sign in their hands that says Black Lives Matter are not looking to destroy their surroundings. They're looking to just
they want to be
demonstrate,
and they want to
demonstrate. Yeah.
So when we say defund the police, that's what we mean, man. Let's put those dollars in the hands of social workers. Let's put those dollars in the hands of mental health professionals. Look, when we're dealing with homelessness, let's not send the police to clean out the camp and arrest homeless people. Let's figure out ways to help the situation. When we're dealing with schools and you've got students running into cops because of things they do at school, let's get social workers to try and address some of the underlying issues that cause students to, perhaps do things in school. And, oh, by the way, let's not suspend them every time that they do something dumb, which is kind of part of the issue. Oh, we suspend them. They've done something dumb. Let's suspend them. Well, now they're mad and they yell at somebody. Oh, are you threatening me? Now I'm going to arrest you. Right. Like, I'm not saying that happens at my school because I don't think that does, but I know it happens at other schools. That's how this thing happens. And so, let's put the money in places that can actually solve problems, and not put the money in places where, where basically we've got paramilitary stormtroopers
and you're
thinking
creating,
violence is the answer because that's their default, right? It's violence.
You're creating criminals,
right?
At the same time,
we're creating criminals that we don't need to create. And the default of police is violence, whether you want to believe that or not. It is. An arrest is an inherently violent act. So whether it's a peaceful arrest or not, it's a violent act. Somebody is taking control of somebody else, and so that is the nature of policing is violence. And the more we can remove that from our society, I think the better. And a lot of people are afraid of that. They're afraid of the idea. Oh my God, less police. What'll happen? Lawlessness and no. And it's like, you know what though? You've got lawlessness now, people. Like it is clear they have done everything with police. They have funded police. They've given them weapons of war. They've given them money. They've trained them. They've given them sensitivity training, implicit bias training. Like they've given them body cameras, man. If you think body cameras is going to solve anything, my God, everything right now is being recorded. Body cameras ain't going to do shit, So let's take away some of that money. Let's put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I don't know. Closing thoughts?
If that sounds like a crazy idea to you, I would encourage you to read about Camden, New Jersey, and what it looked like for them to reimagine their police department. And that's been an interesting read for me this week of kind of, as Jeff and I have talked about that in Slack, of kind of what that even means. So I would encourage you to check that out and to know that you need to listen and then figure out what your next step is. It could be retweeting something, it could be reading something, it could be reaching out to someone or marching. Figure out what it is and then keep going. Keep going. Keep taking steps. Because if we don't, this is not going to change, and we have to do our part, not to run the show by any means, but to be visible, to create space for the people who can't be heard.
Yeah. Well put. Yeah, I don't know. It's just when we say Black Lives Matter and when people say, well, all lives matter and or blue lives matter, whatever. Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that other lives don't matter. Black Lives Matter means that we as a country have minimized the value of a black life for a long time, and that is what Black Lives Matter means, is that we are trying to push towards something, an equal standing, and that's all it is. And you shouldn't take offense when you see Black Lives Matter. It doesn't mean that only Black Lives Matter. It just means that Black lives maybe haven't mattered enough in the past.
There's a baseline of decency, and we have not lived up to that decency. And that's where we need to get to.
Well, it has been an hour and 40 minutes. So I think that's our cue to probably end this. Again, just find Black Voices on Twitter, in your neighborhood. Have conversations. Those are our plugs. It's if you want an example of how it's different when there's a person of color in leadership, just kind of compare how the mayor of Tacoma spoke tonight about Manuel Ellis's death versus maybe what you've seen from other mayors. Having different perspectives matters, different views matters, and don't fall into the belief that just because the four white people in your office have different views on things is diversity, because it doesn't mean their experiences are different. It just means their thought process might be different. But anyways, so I appreciate you, Jeff and Zane, hopping on tonight to talk about this. It was hard for me to agree to do this. It felt very uncomfortable. I don't know about you guys, but yeah, we usually say go Cougs at the end, but I think we'll end it with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.